He had been a teacher, a professor in the seminary. He had written books on philosophy, a man interested in logic and metaphysics, in chemistry and science, a man who wrote books and wrote articles, a journalist. And he was coming from Spain, where he had been elected by his fellow citizens and sent by his superior, the Bishop of Havana in Cuba, to represent his country, Cuba, at court. He was a diputado de Cortes, a deputy at the Spanish legislature. And he was Félix, Francisco, José María de la Concepción, Varela y Morales. I want to see all of that in the award. So who was this man? He was a young orphan boy who first came to North America from Cuba in the late 1700s as a child to live with his grandfather, the commander at the fort of San Marcos in San Agustin, Florida. If you've been to Florida, and that's where he was raised as a child. His mother and father eventually died, and he was taken care of by his grandfather. Remember, at this time, Florida was under the Spanish dominion, so they came from Cuba. Varela, with the abrupt, surprising boldness of the thoughtful shy, declared to his grandfather, when the grandfather, who was the commander and governor of Florida, said, "We want you to be a soldier," he said, "I wish to be a soldier of Jesus Christ. I do not wish to kill men. I wish to rather save their souls." And so the adolescent Varela returned to his birthplace to become a priest in Havana. Later on, he was to return to St. Augustine to die there in 1853. In the interim, from 1823 to 1853, he gave all he had physically, intellectually, materially, and spiritually to the people he served. In his last years, sick and infirm, he left St. Augustine not just to die, but to show to each one of us a long road traveled in faith, hope, and love, a road of pain and suffering, a road of joy and hope. As a newly ordained priest, he ministered in Cuba. He became a professor of philosophy at the seminary. He wrote books and instructed the youth. Later on, at the request of the bishop, he taught the Cátedra of Constitutional Law. And again, at the instruction of the bishop, he presented himself to represent the island and was elected to the Spanish Cortes. In another legislative bill, Varela recommended the recognition of the independence of all South American countries and the development of commercial relations based on a common language, history, and culture. Both projects were defeated. Another project that was very dear to Varela, which was never discussed in the legislature, remember we're talking about 1800s, and he sponsored that project, was the progressive abolition of slavery. Father Varela wrote, "Let us not fool ourselves. Constitutional liberty and equality are synonymous, and these words repel slavery and inequality of rights." No wonder he could not return to Spain. He would be known for his apostolic zeal, his religious fervor, and his tremendous Christian charity. With the help of friends, Padre Varela was soon able to buy his first church, Christ Church on Chambers Street, which then became Transfiguration. Varela wasn't working with Hispanics. Varela was working with the Irish in New York, the poor Irish that were coming to this country, later on the Italians. He founded Transfiguration School to teach the children of immigrants. And that school still continues today. It's to our pride in New York, Transfiguration School, right at the bottom of Manhattan, very near World Trade Center, is the Church of the Transfiguration, founded by Varela. Of course, today the children are not Irish, they're all Chinese. But those are the immigrants. Those are the ones coming. During a cholera epidemic in the city of New York, Varela never leaves, but instead goes to the hospitals to help take care of the dying. He fought against alcoholism and established the Temperance Society in Brooklyn. He died in extreme poverty. He had given all he had to the poor. Remember, he was not a poor fellow. His grandfather was the commander of the fort and governor of Florida, and his family was a family of certain means. So Varela was not poor, but he died in utter poverty. Father Varela's housekeeper at his residence on Reed Street had a constant battle with him to keep him supplied of his essentials. There is a story that she goes to him and she says, Father Varela, I need money because there is a man who needs a coat, and it's winter and it's very cold, so Father Varela gives the money for the coat, and she goes and buys the coat, and the coat was for him because he had no coat, and the housekeeper bought the coat for him. His legacy is great. I would like to highlight one aspect I consider most important for us today. The parish of Transfiguration, Varela's parish, as I said, now serves immigrants from China and other nationalities, and it stands, as I said, also in the shadow of the events of September 11th. Father Varela's life gives to all of us a testimony of hope. Hope in a God that becomes real and tangible in his priesthood through the people he encounters and the sacraments he receives, he administers and receives. Hope at the deathbed of his parishioners, many dying of cholera during the final epidemic, dying of hunger because of utter poverty and of diseases. Hope in truth, whether written or preached and shared in the many hours of discussion with his students. Hope in freedom, not just political freedom, or freedom of the body, but in the freedom that comes from within and envelops our lives, the freedom of the soul. Hope in people, especially the youth. And it is my pleasure to congratulate, as I said at the beginning, those who received the award today, but to congratulate those who have made possible for all of us to get to know better Father Varela, the work that is being done today by many of you in writing, in journalism, and by men and women everywhere who can look to one another with the spirit of Father Varela in the service of truth, of freedom, in the service of the human being. Thank you very much.